the Property Pod. Welcome to the Property Pod with Moneyweb. The property sector is an ever-changing sector. And in this podcast series, your host, Suren Naidu, chats to movers and shakers in the property industry.
Hello and welcome to the Property Pod, South Africa's premier property investor podcast. My name is Suren Naidu, and on this weekly show, we gain insider insights from leading CEOs, analysts, developers and entrepreneurs in the country's dynamic property sector. Talking about entrepreneurs, we have an entrepreneur on the podcast, one could argue. We are pivoting to look at urbanism and cities on the latest episode, with a particular focus on Cape Town. Our guest this week is Rashik Fattar, founder and CEO of Our Future Cities. Fattar is an urban strategist and thought leader who's also co-leads the Cape Town 2040 think tank, which has done extensive research around the Olympic Games and effectively punting the mother city as a potential host for the Games in 2040. We will talk about that too, the big events strategy and what's contributing to putting Cape Town on the map besides its beauty. But we will also look at what a future Cape Town could look like, as well as some of the urban challenges it could face. It may be the best-run city in South Africa, but as with all cities, it faces its fair share of challenges. I teased future Cape Town there a little bit. You will recognize why in a bit. But Fattar, as part of the Our Future Cities initiative, it's basically a Cape Town-based consultancy and think tank. Let's dive into the chat now. Rashik, welcome to the Property Pod.
Thank you so much. I'm glad we finally found time to catch up.
Why the change to Our Future Cities, Rashik? Future Cape Town was a big brand a decade or so ago, and is it because you're a global urbanist now and you in demand globally?
I'll give you the short story, Suren. When I left my actuarial career, we essentially just started a platform and a social media a platform and account to talk about the future development of Cape Town. And of course, it became a business, and it became quite, I would say, embarrassing to work in Johannesburg or Durban under the name Future Cape Town. So about 8-9 years ago, as we worked in different cities, doing research or stakeholder engagement, it was a quick change to Our Future Cities, but we're still deeply passionate about the future of Cape Town.
Okay. So do you own that brand still? Because, it does have a lot of brand equity, one could argue.
I don't think we technically own it. I don't think we ever intended to own it, but I think the future of Cape Town really belongs to everyone. We've been very lucky to work on projects that relate to that, and in South Africa and now a bit outside the country as well. But I would say, you always long for those earlier days when Future Cape Town was the front-facing brand.
So Future Cape Town morphed into Our Future Cities. Can you give us some background on the company? And, you said it started as a social media initiative, but it is a company and a consultancy now in the urbanism space.
Yeah, I would say when I left my career at a big insurance company, we knew that it had to become more than just a website. And at the time we had young people from around Africa and the world writing about the future of Cape Town. For a while, we had people in Lagos and London writing about their cities as well. And to make it into a business, so there are two sides. There's the consultancy, which does research, stakeholder engagement, urban strategy, and various other things, and the think tank part, which I think encapsulates that energy of Future Cape Town, where we get to work on topics with our clients that we want to sort of deeply investigate. And you mentioned one of them being the Olympics Games opportunity. And starting to not just be commentators or for most of the last 15 years, but to work with public sector, private sector, in big and small ways to contribute towards this future.
Okay. Now, you talked about, the reason behind changing it from Future Cape Town to Our Future Cities. Can you give us some idea about the type of work you've done in Cape Town, but also other cities in Africa and around the world?
Yeah, I mean, what's always been really close to our hearts, I wish it was 100% of our portfolio of work is public space. So we've always been working with different groups and entities to figure out how to improve outdoor spaces, our public spaces. And this ranges from, I would say, really small projects. I don't know if you recall, in Sea Point 10 years ago, we took away 2 parking bays to put a parklet in. And it caused a bit of uproar because, how could cars not have 2 parking bays to park in? And so public space has always been a big part of our work. The second part is really just research and data and analytics, understanding what's actually happening in a city, be it a public space, a neighborhood, an area, and what is that opportunity. So a lot of our clients are saying, well, what's happening in this area? Can you talk to people? Can you look at the numbers? Can you speak to some of the investors in that area and figure out what the risks are and what the opportunities are? And you touched on that a bit. For a couple of years, we worked with clients in Durban as well, looking at their inner city, clients who are doing really great work, converting buildings into spaces for smaller businesses, regenerating parts of Florida Road. So I think our work has sort of just traveled with that same value system around that. If we can investigate what's really happening, we can figure out what the opportunity is, and then figure out whether that is a built environment intervention in terms of property, whether that's a public space investment, or in some cases, Suren, if it's a sort of a political or an institutional change that needs to happen in a particular place.
Well, we're not talking about Joburg because it's very topical at the moment, but you mentioned Sea Point. I saw on your website, and I was aware about it a few years ago. There was something more recently that the company was involved with, where you painted a pedestrian crossing. Perhaps you want to highlight that because that's been in the news relatively more recently.
Yeah, look, when we look at the road accident statistics, I think it's about 50-60% of road fatalities are pedestrians. And in South Africa, we really do a disservice to everyone who walks and has to walk to public transport, to and from schools and so forth. And so we worked, like with the parklet, we wanted to be a bit provocative and challenge these, let's say, the city regulations, which I think for many years said you cannot bring color to the area around a pedestrian crossing, or you should really not intervene on the road surface, which I think is the big issue. But we, fortunately, with the leadership of the mayor, with the CEO of Block, who was willing to help us push this along for 9 months, we sort of overcame whatever regulation there was, whether it's public art or road regulation, and implemented that. And we found that about 80 or 90% of people felt safer using that crossing, be it the school kids at the nearby high school, the elderly, and so forth and so forth. So a very small project, but we think quite meaningful to bring a spotlight to what I think is often overlooked. And I think Johannesburg is recently ranked as the worst city to walk in. So hopefully we are starting to work again post-COVID in Joburg and Pretoria. So we're hoping to bring that thinking to those cities as well.
Well, there's a lot of work to be done in Joburg CBD proper, but Sandton is not exactly meant to be a big CBD, considering it's on a hill, and so it's not the most walkable. It's just being walked a little bit more off the Gautrain. But on Cape Town, I have other questions, and we'll get to the Olympics in a sec. But you mentioned Sea Point, you mentioned the crossing. It's been, I don't know if you saw, there was an interesting story, and I don't know if I fully agree with it, but I do have a bias. I host the Property Pod, and a lot of my guests are JSE listed CEOs and, commercial developers. But there's been a lot of focus and controversial comment on Cape Town becoming so expensive. Is it pushing the residents out? But Daily Maverick had a story, I think last week, where they talked about Sea Point losing potentially its history. But I suppose there's a fine balance between, cities change. You do get development and densification. I might be getting ahead of myself here, but what is your view on a future Cape Town? What does it look like? Are we too tied to what Cape Town historically looked like? There's a lot of people moving to Cape Town, not just within South Africa, but globally as nomads. So
Yeah.
Yeah, I just thought I'd ask you about that.
I think firstly, we shouldn't disqualify people's lived experiences. The middle income and the lower middle income and low income and the pressure they're facing in affordability, actually, Suren, in all spheres of life, be it transport, be it schooling. So I don't think it's unique to Cape Town. And then secondly, as you all know, South Africa has I would say, a small tax base in relation to the public services it provides. So there's always a fine balance, and you've seen the discussion about the rates. There's always a very fine balance between what we've all committed to as a country, which is to have the smaller tax base contribute more, but you're always going to need, who is that middle income, and where does that pressure and responsibility sit? And then I think for Cape Town, I think there's a misunderstanding or a misconception. Cape Town is not just Sea Point. And I think we find this a lot in our work when we work in Bellville, when we look at Athlone, when we looking up the West Coast. Cape Town is actually quite a large area, and there are many areas that are improving. There are many areas that are changing. If we use Sea Point, Sea Point 35, 40 years ago, we would have had a different conversation. I'm not sure if you recall. So Sea Point has a very particular trajectory, but it also depends on what you measure. When we look at Sea Point, for example, we see one of the most serviced areas in terms of MyCity bus services. So you can get a bus on High Level Road, Beach Road. And when I lived in Sea Point for about 7 years, in peak traffic, there's a bus every 2 to 3 minutes. So I think the question is, how do you embed that public value, and that's public transport? And then secondly, of course, areas will change. Why have we not been able to pull the trigger and find that sweet spot in delivering more affordable housing products in areas closer to work, especially when, let's say, private developers have delivered, some of them with teams of 20 people have delivered 20 buildings in 10 years. So surely it's possible. So areas will change, but let's just say that there's more to Cape Town than just Sea Point, and there's lots of potential across the metropolitan region. Sea Point happens to be one of the most expensive because it's, I would say, the most desirable in the country and one of the most popular neighborhoods in South Africa.
It's changed a lot. I know Sea Point very well. There's a wonderful place there. My wife has a gluten allergy called Off the Gluten Path. So it's changed over the years. So yeah, interesting comments there. Very similar to saying, like people get bogged down and say Joburg or Durban is in a state and they look at just the city. But in Durban, there's Umhlanga. In Joburg, there's Sandton and, the area around Waterfall City, even though, people could debate about the whole urban sprawl aspect. So thanks for that. Turning to the Olympics now, can you share some insight into the work that both Our Future Cities as well as the Cape Town 2040 initiative, who is backing that? I see there's an architecture firm that you co-lead it with, but is it purely a think tank? Do you get support from the city and other players? Because this is not a new conversation. Cape Town did bid for the Olympics. And, there was talk after 2010 or around 2010 between Cape Town and potentially Durban and even Johannesburg, believe it or not, that could have bid, but nothing materialized.
Yes, sir. And I was about 7 years old when Cape Town had proposed the Olympic Park adjacent to where I grew up. So this has been with me for quite a while. So I mentioned there were two sides to our business, and the second side is the think tank side. And Guy Briggs, who's the director at DHK Architects, a fantastic firm, we've been having this discussion for a long time outside of the think tank. And Guy had worked on the regeneration framework. I don't know if you recall, but London really invested in the most deprived area.
Yes.
Catalyzed by the Olympics and really transformed it, imperfectly, but transformed it. And Cape Town 2040 is an independent initiative. It's not supported or funded by any public entity. And we investigate particular aspects, let's say the opportunities of the Olympics, the housing aspects, the transport aspects. And of course, this is all in our spare time. So we wish we could commit to this and run a 24/7 think tank. But through that, we've met incredible people. We've met the ambassador for sport from France. We've had a brief engagement with the Minister for Sports, Arts and Culture. We were fortunate to study the Paris Olympic Games for about 3 weeks during the Olympic Games last year in Paris and look at what their model has been. And so, yeah, it's really about based on the way that the IOC has changed the hosting of the games, what is that opportunity for Cape Town and the broader Western Cape?
Can you share more insight on that, though? Because, people think Olympics and they think, oh, costly. It's not necessarily not going to be costly, but the research that you did as part of a co-lead on the 2040 think tank highlighted that I think it was mentioned like 84% of the venues are either ready or could be temporary venues. Can you share some insight on that? Because I understand you were in Paris as well during the Olympics, so you got some insight from Paris as well, in addition to you mentioning what happened in London from the 2012 Olympics and how that transformation has benefited London.
Yeah, so there's a huge emphasis in the IOC on using existing venues and temporary venues. And what that means is that if you have, let's say, the Hartley Vale Hockey Centre, or if you have the Belleville Velodrome or the Cape Town Stadium, it's important to maximize the use of that, let's say, for potential Olympics. So, for example, if we'd use Cape Town Stadium, it would not just be rugby sevens, probably be the football finals and possibly one other sport. So they're saying upgrade where people already are. And I think across Cape Town and the Western Cape, there are many facilities that could do with the investment and that already are existing and operating. So that's where that figure comes from. And then it could go even higher. For example, at Place de la Concorde, which is a central part of Paris, they hosted in I would say, temporary scaffold seating. They had the infamous breakdancing. They had BMX. They had a 3x3 basketball in the center of the city. So when we take that into account, we're saying that there must be investment in sports facilities and training facilities, but that you could do it using what you have, especially since there are no more minimum venue capacities or seating required. So that's where that number comes from, sort of in light of these reforms. And what we're proposing based on our current research is saying that these would probably be, if they happened, the biggest investment would be housing and transport. And in that case, you'd want to maximize that investment to make sure it's a long-term investment for the well-being and quality of life of residents.
Well, it's early days right now, but how confident do you think it could gain some backing, 2040 Cape Town bid? Or
what we know so far in terms of an actual bid is that the Minister of Sports, Arts and Culture has last year traveled to the IOC in Lausanne to express what's called official interest, which is we say it's the dating phase. It's a non-committal discussion period in which a potential host in the IOC gets to discuss how to create a sustainable and a good project. So whether it's 2040 or 2044 beyond, what is the best project that you could put forward? And that means, we get to use, let's say, Jeffreys Bay for surfing, Soccer City for soccer, and use more of the country in terms of that. So that's the formal process that was ignited about 1 year ago.
Rashik, you did highlight some of the work that you've done, but you talked about potentially coming back into Johannesburg and being involved with some projects in Johannesburg and potentially Cape Town. But can you give us more insight in some of the work that could potentially come, that you could be involved with, and some of the work that you've done in other cities? I saw there was mention of, some work in Nigeria and Rotterdam.
Yeah, at the moment, we're based in St. George's Mall in Cape Town, and we've been doing some research for a new entity called the Mission for the Inner City of Cape Town, which essentially looks at placemaking as a way to take this Cape Town CBD to the next level. And we've really had the most fascinating insights. I'm not sure when last you've walked St. George's Mall from the Company Gardens to the V&A waterfront, and there's just this incredible untapped potential, thousands of people walking through there. So we've been studying it intensely, mapping traders, looking at what works, what doesn't. So that's an example of a public space project, which is really quite close to our heart, because if you get that walking route right across the city center, suddenly retail comes back stronger. You've got more interest for people wanting to live in the city center as well. So that, for example, is a very interesting one. We've also been looking at for a client in Riyadh, looking at public spaces and how do you bring people out into public spaces and build that culture as well, in terms of daytime and nighttime, especially in countries that are like Riyadh and Saudi Arabia, which are sort of opening up again to tourism and to the world, really. How do you ensure that public spaces become a destination and become attractive to local residents? And then sometimes we get involved in fun projects. For a small European country, we were involved at looking at the future of their national mobility strategy. So how do they move people around into the future in that country as part of an expert panel? So I think if there's a way to impact the future, if there's something that we can do to help people figure out what to do next and where to go and who to talk to, that's what we do. And most importantly, I think it's really bringing that back down to earth and saying, how do we have a benefit to people's lived experiences as well?
Now, I gave a cursory glance to your LinkedIn page and Facebook pages, and you've commented on transitions in Cape Town. The Andrew Boraine years, and this Cape Town CCID is probably the most successful urban improvement district in South Africa. A lot of kudos goes to the city municipality, but a lot is being done by the private sector as well. How does the Mission Cape Town, did you say, how does that differentiate? Because there has been a few placemaking initiatives that has been driven, whether it's through CCID or the likes of the founders of the Design Indaba, for example. I know there was a 2-2 structure that was put near the parliamentary buildings. It's dated a little bit now, so maybe that needs to be replaced at some stage.
Yeah, you could speak to the founders of the Mission for the Inner City, Tim Harris and Brad Armitage, but it's a public sector entity, a non-profit company, but it attracts private investment as well. So it matches what the city has contributed to focus on placemaking. The CCID forms an incredible, I would say, foundation for cleaning, for greening, for safety and security. But I think, Suren, I'm not sure if you recall that there were other entities before, as you mentioned. I think that emphasis on the public realm, on walkability, that's really critical. And as we become more competitive with cities around the world, those really are non-negotiable. So I think the mission really is just at the start of their work, but that's a big part of what they're trying to do is focus on the walkability and the public spaces.
Now, you talk about walkability. Cape Town is a relatively safe city to walk in, but a lot of it happens during the day. Do you have any initiatives around making it a more 24-hour city outside perhaps the V&A waterfront and Long Street?
I think, well, there are two things I suppose I could refer to. The one is, about a year ago, on one block of St. George's Mall, we added these string lights. And it made such a huge difference because, as you know, many cafes and restaurants on St. George's Mall don't open after 5 p.m. So I think that the first response would be do the things that you can do to light up spaces, to build that confidence and trust. And the second, I think, is to listen to young people. I think we need to understand what would attract not just students, but young people, people under the ages of 35 to our city centers. And I think that's because there are so many other competing destinations. I think we forget that not everyone needs to watch the same TV channel. Not everyone needs to go to the same rugby match on the weekend. The great thing about democracy and freedom is this incredible wealth of opportunities of what people can do. So young people are, I think there are about 8 or 9 BMX tracks in Cape Town where young kids of all races are on BMX bikes daily and competing on weekends. And so I think it's getting into touch with what do we do beyond the so-called office market, which is people who go to work every day in an office, and start to understand what would attract the next generation to our city centers. And I think that's where we're going to start to see what brings people back. Is it music? Is it sports? I think we saw how incredible that FIFA fan park was in the Grand Parade during the 2010 FIFA World Cup. So I think that's what we're looking into is we're not in the past, and we've seen the transitions as you've mentioned, but what brings young people back to want to embrace this. And we see young people going to many other places. They go to Sea Point, you can go to Stellenbosch, there's so many things you can do. But for our city centers, they need to be more than just a collection of buildings. And if we can attract young people, I think we're on the right track.
And you can go to Canal Walk too. That place is buzzing on weekends.
And get lost, yes.
On that note, you talked, I'm glad you mentioned young people, because there was an initiative, I think Our Future Cities ran last year, where you had asked for ideas from young people. And there's a fantastic AI-generated picture. Some people could debate whether it's fantastic or not. Those that don't want more skyscrapers in Cape Town, even though a lot may be on their way. Do you want to share some insight into that and some of the ideas that were generated out there? Because there's some fantastic kind of future-focused visuals that you shared with me that, these are young people, their views and visions of what Cape Town could be, even though some people might disagree with it.
Yeah, it was a fantastic initiative run through our program called Next Generation, which essentially connects and builds social networks for some of our younger interns and some of their friends and their networks. And we picked some of the best ideas from these various groups. And one of them was really around seeing Cape Town, Stellenbosch, and the surrounds as one, what I would call city region. I think in Johannesburg, that's really sort of landed, that you're not just Johannesburg anymore. It's Midrand, it's everything really towards Pretoria. And the idea was that you actually need a high-speed train from Cape Town to Stellenbosch. I think it probably stops in some sort of west or something. So, yes, I think the idea said it would cost a lot, but that would be an investment in the long term to create what's called the Cape Town city region. And of course, everything's expensive upfront, like the Gautrain was, but the benefits really are multi-generational if you look at it in the long term. There was also a provocative idea from, I think it was Sydney Cleophas, as an honors student at UCT, saying, why do we have height restrictions in the Cape Town CBD? And is that the healthiest form of development? So I think that's, when you touch on zoning and development rights, everyone gets very, very sensitive. But I thought that was quite interesting, because when you look at a picture of the city bowl of Cape Town, that's only 50 or 60,000 people that live there, out of 3.5, 3.6 million. So what we think is the center of the city is not the center of the city in terms of where people actually live. So I think what Sydney was trying to put forward was to say, there's a greater carbon cost of having people not live in the city center and fighting over every 5 meters of height. Let's relax the restrictions and find a way so that if you're proposing another 100 meters, that 30% could be affordable housing, but that would also be a more sustainable urban form for the city. And of course, make sure no building is taller than Table Mountain, which I think the fear was around the time of Cape Town Stadium, that a 48-meter structure would be taller than Table Mountain. So these are the kinds of ideas, that we encourage in the workplace, and I'm glad we put that together, because it really gave them a platform, and some of them are now working in different parts of the city government itself and elsewhere in the world.
Now, we're going to end on this. Cape Town is becoming a notoriously car-jammed city, and how important is public transport? Because they actually are doing a great job. You talked about how well the My City buses work, but I personally think a train between the CBD and the airport would fly. And then obviously it will unlock developments along the way, never mind to Stellenbosch. So
yes.
How's, that public transport story, even though Cape Town is doing better than the rest of the country, there's a lot more people moving to Cape Town, so there's a lot more cars on the road, and traffic is a big problem in peak hour. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah. I wish I could give you a quick answer, but Suren, if you attend a match or a concert at Cape Town Stadium, what you know is that 60,000 vehicles cannot drive towards the stadium. So there's a option to use a free bus from the CBD. There's the option to park in the CBD, and there's an option to use the fan walk, which 200,000 people used during the FIFA World Cup for that Germany-Argentina quarterfinal, which was incredible. And this is the approach you need to have to public transport, which is what is the opportunity and what is the access you create. We know that rail should be the backbone, right? And France has had a number of issues. And the city is trying to possibly run rail. And rail simply moves the most amount of people in a sustainable way. So I think that that needs to ramp up significantly. And then secondly, referring back to the Cape Town Stadium example, it's how you organize society. And that means that there will need to be some restrictions on single occupant vehicles. So let's say the N2 freeway. Should we not prioritize minibus taxis, buses, school buses for 1 hour during peak? And that, that'll upset lots of people, but that's how you get the majority of people moving to where they need to be quicker. And the second thing is, in terms of opportunity and access, is if our business nodes are, let's say, Century City, Stellenbosch, possibly the airport, could somebody who's looking for a job get to those different nodes in one day with public transport? So I think it's really around, I think this is maybe a philosophical question for government authorities, is what are you trying to do? Are you trying to expand opportunity and access, or provide a public transport service? And we've seen, despite all the complexities, the minibus taxi system provides high levels of access with the least public subsidy. So we cannot disregard the systems that exist, and we've seen that many people are left stranded if some of these routes aren't operating, or if there's a taxi strike. So I think it's not necessarily a solution that I would put forward, but I think it's how do we frame opportunity and access for people across the city. And yes, sometimes that is saying, Beach Road on weekends will be public transport, cycling and walking only. And we haven't seen these sort of tough decisions come out of the offices of the various authorities yet.
Well, it's interesting. It's one of the few cities that didn't have as much issues about the rollout of the My City bus compared to Go Durban and the Rea Vaya in Johannesburg, which Sandton Link is still not ready. But as I say, I've walked down Sea Point numerous times, and the taxis work together. You have the taxis going up the road, and you have the My City buses, which are tremendously. I've tried it myself. So, I suppose there'll be a lot that we could talk about, but Rashik, we'll have to leave it there. That was Rashik Vittar, the CEO of Our Future Cities.
Thanks for listening to the Moneyweb Property Pod with Suren Naidu. To listen to more episodes, go to moneyweb.co.za or the Moneyweb app and follow Moneyweb News for daily updates. Follow Suren on Twitter @Suren Naidu for more of his property industry content and other business stories. The Property Pod.